afternoon. I'm John Clymer, Executive Director of the National Forum for Heart Disease and Stroke Prevention. Together with our partner, the Patient Advocate Foundation and the Steering Committee, I welcome you to the Value and Innovation Forum. Today's topic is biosimilars. The goal of the Value and Innovation Forum is to present multiple perspectives without bias on different policy issues that are controversial or time-sensitive. Ideally, these issues are ones on which we all want a good understanding, but many of us may not have the bandwidth to research them ourselves. With Amgen's financial support, 5 steering committee members come together from various patient organizations to pick topics we think will resonate with an audience of patient groups. We welcome your ideas for future topics. Our plan is to conduct 4 of these briefings per year. We hope you'll take a minute to fill out a feedback survey that will help us make these briefings more valuable to you. In fact, immediately after this briefing, you'll be directed to a feedback form. The steering committee will appreciate your feedback. Then, in about 10 days, you'll receive an email letting you know that this briefing, which is being recorded, will be available for viewing, along with the panelists' slides, their bios, any articles they thought might be of interest, and a short summary of the webinar. I've made several references to the steering committee and want to recognize the members. First, the co-chair, Alan Balch, the CEO of the Patient Advocate Foundation, Michael Bagel from the Alliance for Community Health Plans, Claire Gill of the National Osteoporosis Foundation, Donnell Ivey from the Association of Black Cardiologists, and John Schall of the Caregiver Action Network. Now, the Q&A function is available throughout the briefing if you'd like to ask a question of the panelists. We'll get to as many of the questions as we can. Now to today's topic, biosimilars. A biosimilar is a biologic product that is approved for patient use based on the demonstration of a high degree of similarity to an FDA-approved biologic product, known as a reference product. And it has no clinically meaningful differences in terms of safety or effectiveness from the reference product. To a consumer, it may appear that biosimilars and generic medications are similar, but there are significant differences. While identical generic versions of small molecules can be chemically synthesized, it's not possible to create identical versions of reference biologic medicines due to their complexity. Thus, the processes used to develop generic medicines cannot be applied to the development of biosimilar medicines. There's been hope and some level of expectation that biosimilars could make biologic therapies more accessible to more patients and help to reduce overall spending on medications. Biosimilars cost, on average, about 30% less than reference biologics. Since the first biosimilar was made available to U.S. patients in 2015, 31 biosimilars have been approved by the FDA, and 20 are currently on the market. However, as an AMA Journal of Bioethics article put it, biosimilars are not living up to their promise in the U.S. Our speakers today will delve into the promise of biologics, challenges facing them, and how the U.S. might surmount those challenges and how biosimilars could help improve health equity. Our speakers are Zeid El-Kilani, formerly an economist with the HHS Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation, and currently a PhD student in public policy and management at Carnegie Mellon University. Then, Julie Reed, president of the Biosimilars Forum, and Chad Pettit, executive director and global biosimilars commercial lead at Amgen. And now, to lead us off, the chief medical officer at the Endocrine Society, Dr. Robert Lash. Dr. Lash?
Thank you very much, John, and thank you to the forum and to all the sponsors for inviting me and my colleagues here today. like to start by just telling you a little bit about the Endocrine Society. The Endocrine Society is the nation's oldest and the world's largest association of endocrinologists. We are both endocrine scientists and endocrine clinicians. Our organization has a particularly strong interest in insulin and insulin pricing and insulin availability, which is, I think, why I'm here today speaking with you. Insulin has been the poster child for drug pricing concerns over the past 30 or 40 years. Insulin celebrated the centennial of its discovery, and over the past 30 years or so, there have been new forms of insulin available that have different characteristics, acting more quickly, lasting longer, and they've really changed the way people with diabetes care for themselves. But what we have seen over the past 30 years or so is a dramatic rise in the prices of insulins that are essentially been unchanged since the mid-1990s. And even though the formulations remain unchanged, the prices double, triple, quintuple, and to the point now where a vial of insulin that was $30 in 1995 is $500 today, with essentially no change in what that insulin is. We believe that there are several ways to approach the insulin pricing. One would be to look at rebates. Another would be to look at price negotiations. But a third would be to make sure that forms of insulin are available that would make patients have more options. And biosimilars are one of those forms. Recently, the first biosimilar insulin was approved, and this, we hope, is the first of many that will be approved. We believe that the availability of more forms of the same kinds of insulin, as well as the advent of true biosimilars rather than follow-on drugs, which we'll talk about more, I'm sure, could be a major step to reducing the price of insulin and making insulin available at a reasonable price for more people. It's important to realize that insulin, more than many other drugs, is one of those medications that is necessary on a day-to-day basis for people with type 1 diabetes to live. If you don't have insulin, you can't live. You become sick and you die if you have type 1 diabetes. And to make sure a medication like insulin is available to the people who need it is a priority I think that everyone can relate to. So I'm excited today to be part of this symposium to talk to you about biosimilars and to talk to you about the opportunities that we hope it will provide to patients with both type 1 diabetes and to patients with type 2 diabetes. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lash. Now, Zeid El-Kilani.
Great. I'm going to present some research that was published in Health Affairs this past June. And just a quick disclaimer, this research was commissioned by, if you can go to the next slide. Yeah, this research was commissioned by the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation at HHS, and nothing I say represents the views of those of the department or of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation, and one of the co-authors was at the Office of the Inspector General of HHS and doesn't reflect their opinions either. Next slide. So we were looking at the markets for biosimilars and other biologic-like follow-ons over the time, and we were looking at what was happening in the first 48 months after biosimilar. And the first thing we look at in Exhibit 1 is what is the reference product's market share? And what we can see is the reference product's market share, obviously declines after biosimilar entry, and it declines gradually over time. And so we're seeing the ones that have been on the market longer have lower reference product market shares, but they're still relatively high when you compare it to something like a generic where we see sometimes up to 97% of the market being the generic. But one of the key things we noticed is that the more recent entrants are being adopted faster. So that's potentially promise for the market as new biosimilars might get quicker adoption as we enter. as they enter the market. Next slide. And then the other thing we looked at is the change in prices. This exhibit shows part of that. This specifically talks about the change in price of the reference product. And unlike what we see in most generic markets, we're seeing declines in the reference product price for biologics. So one thing to think about is the impact of biosimilars is not only that biosimilars are cheaper, but it often makes the reference products cheaper as well, so no matter what product the patient gets, they're better off. And then when we look specifically at the biosimilar products, the ones approved under BPCIA, what we're seeing in those first 48 months is that for every additional month of biosimilar entry, we're seeing about a 1% decline in price. Thank you.
Thank you, Zeid. Thank you very much. Julie, you're up.
Always helps to unmute. Can you hear me okay? All right, thank you, John, and thank you, Zeid, and thank you to the forum for inviting me to come and speak on the panel. I'm very honored and hope to, I enjoy these, so it's always fun for me to talk about biosimilars and what we're trying to do for patients and improving cost and access. So if you could go to the next slide. So I think for many of you, and as was mentioned, we've been doing biosimilars or working to bring biosimilars to the US marketplace now for well over 11 years. And as many of you know, it was 2010 when we were able to get the BPCIA Act that passed in legislation that would allow the FDA to approve a biosimilar and to create the regulations. And fast forward 11 years later, we have the first interchangeable biosimilar on the marketplace, Insulin. And in a couple years, we'll have multiple interchangeable biosimilars for one of the highest volume drugs in the world, which is Humira. So it's very exciting as we see the progress from the agency in the development and approval of biosimilars, and ongoing more and more companies bringing these type of products to patients here in the US. So the milestones continue and it is exciting. I think as John mentioned, and if we could go to the next slide, and as Zeid mentioned, we know that biosimilars are lower cost. And what we're seeing in the marketplace, as was mentioned, is the first biosimilar launches at about a 30% discount. And then as we've seen with Zeid's analysis and everything, and I'm sure we'll see with Chad, is the information as more biosimilars are launched, the competition increases and prices go down. So we know there's cost savings out there for both the payers, the employers, the purchasers, but more especially for patients. And that really is the promise of biosimilars, is to lower cost and increase access. So we're excited to see that it is happening. What's really important though, and as John mentioned, is to know that biosimilars have room to grow. And I think that's one thing that the forum is very excited about, is one of our key priorities is to improve the access for patients, increase access to biosimilars, and increase cost savings. And if we could go to the next slide. One of the things the Biosimilars Forum continues to study is what is the market share of biosimilars? How are they getting uptake? What are the barriers to uptake, and how can we get biosimilars to more patients? We know, and this is so true, we've been studying this not just at the federal Medicare level, but also in the private payer, employer, commercial market, and as well as in the state Medicaids, and at the state level, how much money could purchasers and governments save with biosimilars? A lot of folks talk about how a biosimilar is not a generic. And having been in this for a long time, I want to clarify that. A biosimilar is very complicated to develop. It's not a generic from a scientific and regulatory perspective. But as consumers, at some point, we should be expecting that the marketplace starts to show uptake of greater uptake of biosimilars and greater savings. And that is the comparison and the promise. It's about the comparison to the generic drug marketplace and how patients and consumers save money. And that's what biosimilars is about. We know that if biosimilar market share increases to 75%, think about it, if generic launches and overnight they're at the 99% market share. Just by getting some additional market share for biosimilars in the US, we'll have greater savings. Up to close to 14 billion. We have several studies that show in the next 10 years, biosimilars could save the country at least $100 billion. Actually, I correct myself, in 5 years. But that requires removing barriers to uptake, getting biosimilars more access for patients, getting greater competition, taking away misinformation and patent thickets and other barriers. We talked about 31 biosimilars approved, yet only 20 are on the marketplace. Why? Why are we not getting these biosimilars out there sooner and getting greater cost savings? We definitely at the forum, and we can share the link, we are studying this on a quarterly basis and happy to share all the information that shows there's room to grow. There's barriers that continue to be in front of biosimilars, and we're leaving savings on the table for patients, the people you represent, and for consumers and governments. So I'll stop there and just, again, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Julie. Before we bring our next speaker up, I want to just bring a question from the audience to Zeid El-Kilani. Point of clarification. When you showed a slide that showed a number of different products on it, the question is, are all of those insulin or were they multiple products?
Sure. So that slide represented the multitude of products in which we have biosimilars on the market for. It's not just insulin. We have plenty of other complex drugs that are highly used and have really large market shares, and they also have biosimilars as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that, Zeid. And now our next speaker is Chad Pettit.
All right. And I think last, maybe hopefully not least, it's good to be here, and I just want to thank the National Forum for hosting this event. It's an important one. As said, I'm Chad Pettit. I lead our global commercial team for our biosimilars. You know, Amgen's kind of in a unique place. We've got 40 years now, over 40 years of experience developing biologic medicines. And we also have a tremendous commitment to biosimilars. We've invested at this point over $2 billion to develop a portfolio of 10 biosimilars that are here now in the marketplace and some that are coming into the future. And so we're excited about biosimilars. And really, we kind of stand in this unique place with this perspective around innovative medicine really being the key to treating disease that doesn't have treatment now, combined with robust competition between the reference products and the biosimilars to really create the best hope in totality of lowering healthcare costs and at the same time managing disease. If we could go to the next slide. And so I'm going to just share a little bit of data. Amgen published our biosimilar trends report recently. It's available on amgenbiosimilars.com. And a couple data points that I think kind of reiterate what we've heard so far from Zeid and from Julie, which is helpful. If we look at what's going on, the marketplace with biosimilars in the US is really advancing well. There's 90 programs that the FDA has as development programs right now, which compares to 64 in 2018. When we look at the number of biosimilars that are approved, there's 31. There's 21 of those that have been launched. When we compare the marketplace in the US versus what we've seen in Europe, if you kind of time adjust it, because Europe had their pathway approved earlier than the US is actually in the first 6 years ahead of Europe. 31 biosimilars approved versus 11 in Europe. So it's a good place to be, and I think there's a lot of excitement with biosimilars. When you think about what it means, if we could go to the next slide. Could just advance one. So just to, if we could advance the slide, but while we're doing that, what it means is, as we've talked about, significant competition for biosimilars. And we're seeing that in terms of list prices, the wholesale acquisition cost. We're seeing biosimilars come in at 15 to 30% lower price than the list price, and we're seeing them come in 3 to 24% lower than the originator average selling price. That's a good place to be. And then from there, if we look at the trend over time, that's the starting point. We're seeing an annual rate of price decline of 9 to 19% for biosimilars. And I think, as Zeid pointed out, the reference products prices are declining. What we're seeing on an annualized basis, it's 4 to 17%. That's a mark of healthy competition. And so what does it mean for patients? The Pacific Research Institute published a study noting that biosimilars have the potential to reduce out-of-pocket spending by $238 million over the 9 classes where biosimilars have been approved. And if we look at just the last 5 years and what I would call the first wave of biosimilars, the US healthcare system's already saved $9.8 billion in the first 5 years. And as Julie pointed out, as we look forward, there's great expectations, and whether it's 100 billion in the next 5 or over the next 5 to 10, some are estimating 150. There's more to come, and so just to wrap up, from Amgen's perspective, it's an exciting time. The marketplace is really advancing. We're seeing the products that have been launched in just the last 2 years are achieving 65% share versus what we saw just a couple of years ago in 2019, where products were achieving 13% share in their first 2 years. So there's acceleration going on. And as we think about what do we need now with the first wave, but then also the second wave that's coming and the third wave as we look at the end of the decade and beyond, what do we need? So this slide, you can see the acceleration with the more recent launches achieving over 50% share within the first 2 years, which is pretty fast for a biologic medicine. And then just to conclude, if we go to the last slide, and so what do we need? Stakeholders need to be confident in the regulatory standard, that it's scientifically accurate. We need a marketplace that encourages this competition and allows for the meaningful cost savings. We need to make sure that patients, providers, and all the stakeholders are really educated well about biosimilars. And then the fourth thing is, and sometimes not noted, what underlies the success of the biosimilars marketplace is this foundation of intellectual property. If society and manufacturers are not motivated to bring new medicines to the market, you don't have biosimilars down the road. And biosimilars in and of themselves, between treating disease that's not treated and then bringing in competition, if we don't have that, you don't have this long-term sustainable marketplace that we're hoping to achieve. So with that, I'll wrap up and we can go to the Q&A.
All right. Well, thank you, Rob, or thank you, Chad, very much. Julie, you pointed out that 31 biologic or biosimilars have been approved, and I think both you and Chad said there are 20 on the market. How do you explain the gap there?
So the gap between 21 and 20, where I may be wrong.
Julie, we're having difficulty hearing you suddenly.
There
we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think, the gap for several of the Humira biosimilars have not been launched yet. So there is at least 7 right there. And Enbrel will not be launching. The Enbrel biosimilar will not be launching, I think, Chad, for another at least 10 years, because it's an Amgen product, right? It's Amgen's reference, so 2038. That it? So it's patents, patent thickets, IP, things that originators have been able to do to prevent competition and prevent biosimilars from launching. I think, Chad, you like you said, you guys, Amgen's in the unique space of being on both sides. Enbrel, any ideas? Because that's I think 17 years from now.
Yeah, so I'm not an expert in the patent law, so I won't comment on Enbrel specifically. But what I will say is that intellectual property is really key to the marketplace overall, and there's a lot of complexity that goes along with that, as we all know. What we need is a pathway that preserves that to incent innovation, and then at the appropriate time, which gets adjudicated through the system and the IP system, then to allow competition to come in with biosimilars. And so, Julie, to Julie's point, we've got 21 on the market. It's actually very strong, and you've got a whole bunch that are coming. In particular, those that we expect to compete with Humira, which is an adalimumab, in the next couple of years.
John, I think, Enbrel, Humira, these are products that have been on the market for well over 20 years. So I think that's one of the reasons, again, patents and IP protections or extending patents well beyond the original piece is one of the reasons we're seeing that these biosimilar competition is not coming to the market in a timely way.
Okay.
Can I jump in real quick?
Please,
on the patent issue?
absolutely.
Yeah, good. Zeid knows more.
Yeah, I think this is probably the most complicated part of it. One of the reasons biologics compared to generics were given 12 years of exclusivity was the thought that their patents were weaker. What we found out over time is that's not the case. And I think the other thing is we always assumed with a patent, you get 17 years on the patent life. A product approved in 1998 still having patents way after those 17 years is what I think is really perplexing. They found new things to patent, and they've been able to patent things after approval in ways that I think we didn't expect, and we didn't expect them to be as strong as they are. So there needs to be some kind of assessment of how these patents are working, how they are as strong as they are, because it's not like a generic where you could have a really strong patent on the molecule itself, since the molecules can differ slightly for biosimilars. So I think we were all kind of surprised with how strong these patents have ultimately come. And I don't think anyone ever anticipated that when we created the biosimilar pathway.
I think use of the patent process and how it affects people's access to therapies that they need would be a great topic for a future briefing. And we could spend at least an hour on that. Rob, you referred to insulin as the poster child for biologics, and really more as the poster child for drug pricing issues. And I'm wondering, we've seen, as you pointed out, the tenfold increase in the consumer cost of insulin, and yet not any big or material intrinsic change to the product. How, with the advent of biologics, it seems, or biosimilars, it seems like that almost defies logic. So how do you explain that? And what do you and the Endocrine Society suggest as solutions to control costs?
Well, it's a great question. And I think it has a lot to do with how follow-ons were, which we think of as biosimilars now, but really aren't, what happened when they came on the market, and the opportunities that biosimilars allow. And just to talk about insulin specifically, there's a very popular insulin called Lantus, which has been on the market for at least a couple of decades now. And a few years ago, a follow-on, another insulin, Biosimilar, came out, which for all intents and purposes is Lantus. But you can't go to the pharmacy and say, oh, Biosimilar, Lantus is too expensive, I want Biosimilar. You either need to have a prescription for Lantus or your prescription for Biosimilar. So there wasn't a huge amount of price pressure to bring down the prices, especially when there's only one other insulin out there and you just can't substitute for it freely. But with the advent of biosimilars, of medication, the Lantus biosimilar, which is called Semglee, now there's a lot more freedom. Now you can go to the pharmacy and the pharmacist can say, hey, you can get Lantus for this much money, or you can get Semglee for this much money. And patients know, I'm hoping what patients will see and what prescribers will see is that it's no longer you're getting a second-rate drug or you're being forced to take something else, but you're getting the same medication that works the same way and will have the same result, and that you have opportunities to have that for less money. And that insurance companies, as well as prescribers, as well as patients, will see the opportunity to get the same medication for less money, that there's more competition in the market, and that at the end, everyone who depends on insulin to remain healthy will be able to get the insulin they need at a much lower price. John, you're muted.
Yep. Thanks, Rob. And we had a question from Priscilla Thomas about what are the insulin biosimilars in the marketplace, and I think you just answered that at least partly.
Yeah, there's just one.
Okay.
There are follow-ons. I mean, there are medications that, if they came out today, would probably be called biosimilars, but because they came out before the biosimilar pathway was available, they're not called biosimilars. So for the short-acting insulin, Humalog, there is a follow-on drug called Admelog. Humalog and Admelog are the same drug, essentially, but they're not technically biosimilars because Admelog came out before the biosimilar pathway was open. So the only insulin biosimilar that's available now is Semglee, which is the Lantus biosimilar, or Glargine is the name for the whole family of this molecule.
Okay, thanks. And Julie, Priscilla Thomas also asked, again, about the difference between biosimilars and generics? I think you can answer that real crisply.
Sure. And thanks, John, and thank you. For
Oop, except we can't hear you.
my apologies. I think my son came home and he's gaming. He's dying in the house.
All right. Well, now we have you.
So really the difference is the pathway. And I think Dr. Lash really sort of summed it up about follow-ons, other insulins that came out that before the FDA got authorization to do a biosimilar, which at the FDA, to get technical, is the 351K pathway. And so when we talk about these biosimilar products, the biggest piece everyone needs to know is that the product is approved to be as safe and efficacious as the reference biologic. And that's really important. The pathway and how the biosimilar got approved is something you're not even going to think about as a patient. You just need and want to know that the biosimilar is safe and as efficacious as your original insulin. And so, and probably at a lower cost. I'm going to, put that out there, but and I think that's what's important is your doctor supports biosimilars, Dr. Lash. It's incredible to hear the Endocrine Society support for biosimilars. It's very encouraging, but I think that's the big piece. Generic versus biosimilar, small molecule versus biologic, getting into the science of these things, but it's really about how the FDA evaluates and approves these products. But in each case, same safety and efficacy as the originator product. So all good. I hope that explains it.
Yes, thank you. Does anybody have a follow-on to that? Okay. So another audience member, Nicole Adams, asks, how do you anticipate the existing rebate programs affecting biosimilar uptake given the significant dollars tied to reference utilization? Zeid, do you want to lead off on that?
Sure. Yeah, I think this is the thing we're not yet sure about, because most of the biosimilars that have launched today have been more in the physician administered space, where we can see a little bit more of the net prices of the branded drugs or the reference products. The big question, I think, would be is if PBMs do in fact preference their rebates over getting the lower net prices.
And PBMs are
pharmacy benefit managers. So these are the people who are negotiating the prices for and setting the formularies for your insurers, or working with your insurers to set the formularies. There are some people who think that they are privileging getting the most rebate, which would suggest that they might prefer the reference product. But if they are acting as good agents and moving to what has the lowest net price, then it shouldn't be that big of an issue. I think the bigger question will be how it impacts some of the programs that have high inflation rebate penalties. So things like insulin and Medicaid has really substantial rebates. And if we see those reference product prices, their average manufacturer price, so the price they're selling to pharmacies, go down, we could actually see some reversals in the Medicaid space. So there's some really interesting things that might go on, and we don't really know how that will all shake out until it happens.
Yeah. Chad, anything you want to add to that?
I would just say, in general, if we look at the first wave of biosimilars that have been launched, have been medical benefit products, and we're seeing really strong uptake. I look at examples of Amgen's Mvasi or Kanjinti, which have achieved very strong market share within a couple of years. When we look forward, as they had pointed out, it is exciting. We're moving into a new phase of the marketplace with pharmacy benefit reimbursement, and then also we're starting to see the beginning of interchangeable biosimilars being approved. And so in terms of how things work with the pharmacy benefit managers, we're confident as a manufacturer moving into that future, and we believe the system as it exists really supports the uptake of biosimilars and the competition really that comes from that. Where we do have concerns is with the Build Back Better bill that's going through right now, which maybe we'll discuss here in terms of the prescription price controls that are called negotiation, but are really U.S. price controls, that could really discourage the development of generic medicines, of biosimilar medicines, and really create some artificial distortions to the market and to competition that would be very damaging.
So, Chad, I want to follow on that last comment that you just made for a moment. You showed the timeline that shows that Europe has had the door open to biosimilars longer than the U.S., and yet the U.S. now has more approved biosimilars. Do you think the different policy approaches to pharmaceutical pricing between Europe and the U.S. Explains that, or are there other factors that explain why the U.S. has caught and overtaken Europe in terms of biologics approved or biosimilars approved?
Yeah, there's a lot of factors, and I think, on a regulatory perspective, there's different ways to compare what the FDA is doing versus what the EMA in Europe's doing. I think from a U.S. marketplace perspective, the U.S. is robust for a reason. There's a reason that manufacturers want to come to the U.S. and want to compete here in the U.S. And it's because we do have a healthcare system that provides the incentives for manufacturers to come and introduce medicine and be able to compete and have a return on investment. And so, anything that discourages that really is counterproductive to what we're seeing already as a really robust competitive situation in the market that is creating the cost savings that we need for these products that that now have biosimilars competing, and at the same time laying this foundation for a future of innovative medicine, but also biosimilars to compete with that innovative medicine.
Okay. Certainly, we could have another lengthy briefing about differences in portion of GDP going to healthcare and so forth. But again, another topic for another day. Rob's comment about, or example of the changes in insulin pricing reminded me of a comment by our colleague Mark Fendrick, the director of the Value-Based Insurance Design Center at the University of Michigan, who I've heard Mark give dozens of presentations, and I don't think I've heard a single one in which he has not said that people don't care how much healthcare costs. They care how much it costs them. And so, we know that there are all these distortions in the market, so that what consumers pay often is very different from the total cost. And Julie showed figures from the Pacific Research Institute study that show these very large sums that can be saved, I think, by states. Is that right, Julie? So, we're looking at a system that costs a tremendous amount. The US does pay more for healthcare in terms of GDP, in terms of gross dollars, in terms of per capita spending than any other country on the planet. And yet we underperform in many ways. So are biosimilars part of the solution to that economic stress? And we also see that COVID-19 has really illuminated some huge and terrible inequities in people's access to health and to health care. Do biosimilars offer any opportunities on the not only on the economic side, but on the closing the care gap side? So, Julie, I'll give you a first shot at that.
Thank you. Can you hear me? No.
Barely.
Barely. How about now?
Yeah, that's better.
Thank you. Apologies. So on the access piece and everything else, and just a couple follow-ups, because I think this is really important. It is about access. And so much, as Zeid said, and as we even looking at the PBMs who were in the trenches with us when we tried to get the law passed that created biosimilars, access to the PBMs formularies is key. Rebates from an originator or from a biosimilar that lower competition and don't give all biosimilars parity access is not going to create a competitive and sustainable biosimilar market. We need to open up access, and all stakeholders need to do it. The other piece and the promise about equity and what we're seeing in Europe, as Chad mentioned, the FDA is approving biosimilars at a faster rate than the EMA did in Europe, but country by country, countries incentivized the uptake of biosimilars. So in Europe, we're seeing more patients getting treatments that they did not have access before. We're seeing countries like the UK taking the savings they get from biosimilars and putting those back into their healthcare systems in order to hire more nurses for patients and turning those savings around. Chad showed a great example of the oncology market here in the US, which is really one of the only successful biosimilar markets. And that's because in the oncology, the US incentivizes the use of biosimilars. We have oncology care models that incentivize physicians through shared savings to use lower cost biosimilars. So right away, when the biosimilars came out, physicians adopt them. Endocrinologists should have that same shared savings. Rheumatologists should have that same shared savings. Patients should have that same shared savings. You need, and we know, we need to have a robust biosimilar marketplace, which means biosimilars need to be supported by all stakeholders, and we need to incentivize their uptake. Take the barriers away, incentivize their uptake, incentivize people, because that's how we, especially as Americans, behave. You incentivize me, I've got kids. They're gonna do what I ask them to do a lot more often, and it works. And so I just wanna say, John and everyone, this is a huge opportunity, but it takes more than manufacturers to just bring a biosimilar to market. We need all stakeholders to join us in this. So,
okay.
Thank you. Sorry.
No, thanks, Julie.
All
right, well, let's go around the horn with this one. So, clinicians next. Rob Lash.
So which is there the specific Priscilla Thomas's question? Is that the one you wanted us to address?
Well, so what about do biosimilars offer not only an economic opportunity, but also a patient access opportunity?
Oh, I think, yeah, I mean, I think that the answer is a big yes. It offers patients an opportunity to, when you go into a store and there's only one product that you can get, whether it's a car or whether it's milk or whatever it happens to be, the price is what the price is. Biosimilars offer the opportunity for competition and for real competition in the marketplace because it's really the same product that you're getting. Is sometimes you go into a store and you look at the price, you go, God, that price is a little too low. Is it really going to be the same stuff? And the answer for biosimilars is yes. The FDA has said it is the same stuff, and if it's at a lower price, it's a feature, not a bug. And I'm really hoping that as more biosimilars become available, particularly for the insulins, that patients are going to see this as an opportunity to lower their price, or to look at it another way, to be able to pay 2012 prices for the same vial of insulin that they're getting in 2022. Because because that vial of, whether it's Lantus or Humalog or Toujeo or whatever brand name they're getting, that's the same vial of insulin they were buying 10 years ago. The price is just a heck of a lot higher. So no one's saying that it's a better insulin. It's not even in a prettier vial. It's in the same darn vial. And if you can get a biosimilar, which is the same insulin for less money, that's something I think people should really take seriously as an opportunity to lower their healthcare costs, particularly if they have a high deductible healthcare plan, where they're paying a huge amount of money in the first few months of the year to get their insulin before their insurance kicks in.
All right, thanks. Zeid, from the Economist perspective, is there anything that you'd add on that question?
So I do think biosimilars have an important part in increasing access. And in the data, what we've seen is a little bit mixed, because I think one of the things we have to also consider is if they're coming on the market in a time where that product is still, the forefront of what people can use. So we've seen cases, and this was in another part of our Health Affairs article, where when the filgrastim biosimilar came on the market, we actually saw a decreased utilization in it because they went to pegfilgrastim instead. But when that biosimilar went on the market, it definitely increased access to people for that market. So there's a complicated part. Is it in the development curve in that market where it's still an innovative product? What we might see is a decline in it. But when it is still the cutting edge product, we definitely see that biosimilars increase access, increase volume for that product. So there are definitely new patients who are able to access it, who weren't able to access it.
All right, thanks. Chad, from a manufacturer's perspective, anything that you see differently or would say differently?
I would agree, biosimilars in terms of the benefit to patients and access to patients, it's a win for patients. It's a win for the healthcare system in terms of creating cost share savings. And, from Amgen's perspective and, having 10 biosimilar medicines and our experience in biologics, all we need is just give us a level playing field to compete. Everything in the system as it currently exists is foundational to supporting biosimilar uptake, as we've seen with the first wave and as we think we're going to see with the second wave. Now, that being said, there are some elements of the status quo that need to change, and we're hoping do. An example of that would be modernizing Medicare Part D, and with the aim of enhancing access and affordability for patients and working through policy solutions that can reduce the out-of-pocket costs that are borne by patients at the pharmacy counter, and also at the same time improve access. So the system, in terms of, do we need major changes for biosimilars to achieve success? I don't think so. Do we need to, fundamentally work with the system to improve access for patients across all medicines? I would say yes, especially with Medicare Part D.
Okay, thanks. And Chad, that's a great segue into my next question, which is if there's one policy change that you could wave a wand and cause to be undertaken, either at the federal level or in the states, in order for the U.S. to take greater advantage of biosimilars, what would that policy change be? And let's start with Rob Lash.
Oh, thanks a whole bunch for starting with me. I'm going to say for level the playing field, which would be for me, get rid of rebates.
Okay. All right. Chad, you referred to modernizing Medicare Part D. I don't know if that's going to be your answer or if your number one policy change would be something different.
Yeah, I would say, on the medical benefits side, as we've seen with our launches, with biosimilars can achieve uptake, and we're doing great and great success. So with that side, in terms of how payment works with the ASP system and having separate codes between the reference product and the biosimilar, that's foundational and something we should maintain. In terms of Medicare Part D, with the donut hole and the cost for patients, that's something that we should really be thinking about policy solutions to improve.
Okay. And Chad, you just referred to ASP. I know from a question that some of our audience members know what ASP means, but I'm pretty sure that some may not. So what's the definition of ASP?
Yeah, ASP is the average selling price. It's not a true average. It's the calculation that Medicare uses to reimburse physicians and hospitals in the Medicare Part B side of reimbursement.
Okay, thanks. Julie Reed, one policy change, what would it be?
Would be to take down the barriers, access to
Sorry, we
doing it again.
Yes.
All right, can you hear me?
There we go.
The policy is twofold. Take down the barriers to access to biosimilars, and like in oncology, as Chad has shown us, incentivize the uptake across the board. Stakeholders get in. Let's incentivize uptake of biosimilars, and everybody's a winner. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And we're close to the top of the hour. So can you, in 30 seconds, identify one or two of the barriers to which you were just referring when you said take down the barriers?
Absolutely. No access to a formulary. So we talked about that. Zeid talked about it. Dr. Lash talked about it. Give biosimilars parity access. Let them compete. Don't have just one biosimilar on your formulary. Have more than one. The other one is misinformation. People, and I apologize, I answered a question because I thought we were running out of time. Biosimilars are not inferior to the reference product. So I think it's really important as biosimilar champions, we're all explaining that. And please, if you have questions about that, I'm more than happy through the Biosimilars Forum to connect anyone to the FDA. But let's get rid of the misinformation that's out there that talks about a biosimilar being inferior to its reference product. It's harmful to doctors. It's harmful to patients. Let's all get rid of that. Okay, so I think that's it. That's
okay.
It.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. And Zeid El-Kilani, we're down to the last 30 seconds, but I want to make sure we hear from you. So, policy
I'm
change.
not going to say patents because that can be a separate discussion. I think the main thing is probably twofold: education. So when Kaiser Permanente switched to Zarzia, they did a lot of doctor education, and actually on the if it's inferior to the reference product, when Kaiser did a random study within their own group and their own members on when they switched, they found there was actually less adverse events with the biosimilar than the people who stayed randomly on the reference product. So that's one thing to consider. And then broadly across different markets, I think we need to make sure in both the physician administered space, the medical space, and in the pharmacy space, that the providers have the financial incentive to use biosimilar.
Okay, thank you very much. And thanks to Rob Lash, Julie Reed, Zeid El-Kilani, and Chad Pettit for sharing your knowledge and your insights today. The Value and Innovation Forum briefing topics are chosen exclusively by the members of the Value and Innovation Forum Steering Committee. We're grateful for the financial support that we receive from Amgen, who has no bearing on selection of topics or the selection of speakers, which also are made independently by the Value and Innovation Forum Steering Committee. I want to remind people that you will receive, those who registered for this will receive in your inboxes within the next 10 days, a link to a web page that will have a recording of this briefing, as well as a written summary and reference materials that are provided by the speakers, their organizations, and by other parties, including the National Forum. And finally, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thanks to our speakers, and have a great rest of your week and happy holidays.
Thank you.
Happy holidays. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're done. So you all were great. Gosh, I think we easily could have had 2 hours, and you all would have made it a very interesting and informative briefing. So thank you.
Very well done, John. Appreciate the moderation.
Well,
Yes, thank
thanks.
you so much, John.
You all made it very easy and challenging in one way because you all are so knowledgeable, but you really made it easy. And I am grateful for your participation. Yeah, thanks.
All right.
Chad, you're welcome.
I just wanted to apologize to Chad. My computer completely just died on me right in the middle of your slide. So I was on the phone with Jen, who fortunately stepped up and managed to
I just feel bad for Julie, who kept trying to raise her.
Yeah.
I'm talking here.
The technology was not working for us today.
No, it was not.
Oh, man.
It's good to see you, Julie. I love the picture of your kids behind you. It's beautiful.
They're 18 and 14 now, so I figured I could
Crazy.
leave on the shelves. This guy over here has got a big old beard and is in college.
Oh, man.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all. I know Caroline has mentioned it multiple times, but just a reminder, if you have articles, reports, studies, and especially things like one-pagers that crystallize important issues, please send them on to Caroline so that we can make them available to anyone who comes to the site for information about biosimilar issues.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
All right, guys.
Not just
Take
a
care,
pleasure,
everybody.
but an honor working with all of you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
All right.
Jen.
No problem. That's why we have two of us in the background to pull it up if something happens with technology. So
Yep.
I
Yeah.
I have no idea what happened. It just froze, and
Yeah. Well, it happens.
but it's always happening with mine at the moment. So I said to Jen, I will be having a complaint to Comcast because it's yeah. Good luck with that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah. Great job, John.
I'm sure they'll respond immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, Jen, I've got a list of all the things that I think I need to do next steps.
Okay.
So I'll just email them over to you, just to make
Awesome.
sure I'm not missing anything. And then I'll get that started